that lingers in the shadows of every spiritual search. A question we rarely speak aloud, but always feel in our bones. What exactly is the difference between soul and spirit? Not the surface difference, not the dictionary difference, but the difference that echoes through your dreams, your memories, your losses, your longings. You felt it. When you say your soul is tired. When a song lifts your spirit. 2 words, 1 life. But do they really mean the same? Some traditions say yes, others say no, insisting that one is earthly, the other divine. One is the self, the other, the source. So which is it? To even ask this question is to enter sacred ground. This isn't about philosophy, it's about perception. It's about how you experience being human. It's about descent and ascent, form and formlessness. The remembered ache of your personal story and the vast silence that was here before it began. The soul descends, the spirit ascends, and between them, you live. Let's begin with the words themselves. Soul comes from Sawol, ancient, worn, possibly tied to the sea. Imagine the soul as something fluid, emotional, moving like tides across the shoreline of your life. It is the ache you carry after a loss, the quiet knowing in your gut, the image that appears in a dream and stays with you for years. The soul is the voice of your myth, the personal, symbolic story that only you can live. Now, breathe. Spirit is another matter entirely. It comes from spiritus, Latin for breath, wind, the invisible that animates. The spirit isn't rooted in memory. It's not interested in narrative. It lifts, it expands, it transcends. The soul moves downward and inward, into feeling, into history, into the symbolic. The spirit moves upward and outward, into stillness, awareness, presence. Even the etymology tells the story. Soul is of the deep. Spirit is of the heights. One leads us into the fertile darkness, the moist soil of being human. The other lifts us into the luminous sky, the wide, clear expanse beyond name. And this split is not just linguistic, it's spiritual architecture. In Christianity, the soul is the part that struggles, that sins, that seeks salvation. The spirit, it's the breath of God, the part that communes directly with the divine. In Kabbalah, nephesh is the soul, tethered to emotion and physicality. Ruach, the spirit, is the bridge to the divine purpose. In Sufism, the soul is refined through suffering until it becomes worthy of reunion with the spirit. Even psychology echoes this. Carl Jung called the soul the depth of personal meaning and shadow. He spoke of the spirit as clarity, cosmic order, transcendence. Do you feel the pattern? Soul, complexity, depth, story. Spirit, clarity, unity, release. But this isn't about opposition, it's about polarity. You are not meant to choose one over the other. You are meant to live as the tension between them. The soul is what knows grief. The spirit is what whispers hope. The soul speaks in poems. The spirit speaks in silence. The soul is your intimacy with life. The spirit is your union with the source of all life. One dives into the wound. The other reveals that even the wound is sacred. So here's the deeper truth. When soul and spirit meet, something transformational begins. The soul becomes luminous. The spirit becomes embodied. And you become whole. But first, the descent. First, we follow the soul downward into the symbolic, the shadow, the aching truth of being human. Let's go there. Descent is not something we chase. We're taught to rise, to overcome, to leave pain behind like it's a stain on our timeline. But the soul has other plans. The soul doesn't ascend first. It descends. It whispers not in triumph, but in tremble. Not in clarity, but in symbols. The soul's descent is the journey into shadow, into wound, into the story you tried to outrun. It's not about despair, it's about depth. The myths knew this. They always did. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, stripped of all power as she descended into the underworld. Orpheus, descending for Eurydice. Dante walking through hell before ascending to paradise. Why this recurring spiral through darkness? Because the soul is not interested in escape. It seeks truth, and truth lives in the places we avoid. To do soul work is to turn toward the pain, not to suffer but to see, not to fix, but to listen. The soul doesn't lecture, it invites, it doesn't argue, it echoes. It speaks in dreams, strange, vivid, and unforgettable. A flooded house, an abandoned child, a lion pacing in the woods, a long-lost lover appearing at your door. These aren't just dreams, they're soul signals, not puzzles to decode, invitations to feel. Each symbol is a key asking, what have you buried? What still waits for your attention? The soul waits, not with judgment but with fierce compassion. It holds the parts of you you've forgotten how to hold. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the exiled self, the truth too painful, too messy, too real. But the soul doesn't exile, it integrates. It gathers what was fragmented, the trust you lost after betrayal, the laughter that disappeared with grief, the innocence you buried in childhood. These aren't flaws, they are thresholds. The descent is sacred, it's not punishment, it's initiation. And in our modern world, it's often neglected. We're told to rise, to glow up, to stay high vibe. But the soul says, no, feel everything. Because only by feeling can you return to wholeness. In soul work, you don't bypass the wound. You build a home around it. You light candles for the parts of yourself that never got to speak. You listen to the stories that shaped you. You trace the lineage of longing back through generations. And in this process, you begin to remember, not just who you are, but what you are made of. You are not a broken thing to be fixed. You are a sacred thing to be remembered. James Hillman once wrote, "The soul is not a thing, it is a perspective. It shifts how you see your life, not as a series of problems, but as a myth unfolding. Your heartbreak is a chapter, your grief, a turning point. Your synchronicities, sacred whispers from something deeper. To live soulfully is to live mythically, to see your life not just as a timeline, but as a tapestry, woven with meaning, memory, and metaphor. And when you've touched the soul's depth, when you've cried in the cave, danced with the shadows, embraced the ache, something happens. You become ready to rise, but this rising isn't escape, it's integration. The ascent comes not from denial, but from depth. The spirit begins to stir, and that's where we're headed next. After the descent comes the rise, not a climb toward escape, but an awakening to what's always been within you, waiting, watching. The spirit's ascent is not about transcending the human. It's about remembering the divine that pulses through the human. It's the breath behind the body, the silence beneath the story, where the soul leads us into the wound. The spirit shows us the light that was never absent, even in pain. The spirit does not speak in symbols. It speaks in stillness. It does not wrestle with identity. It simply is. You've felt it in the in-between moments. When thought pauses, when breath deepens, when you gaze into the sky and forget who you were supposed to be. This is not absence, it's presence. The spirit is not tethered to your timeline. It exists outside of clocks, outside of memory. It is the breath you return to when everything else falls away, the space you touch when your thoughts dissolve in stillness, the knowing that remains even when the story breaks. Spirit is not something you earn. It's what's left when you stop pretending to be anything at all. In Vedanta, it is called Atman, the undistorted self beyond personality. In Buddhism, it is Rigpa, pristine awareness beyond illusion. In Taoism, it is the way, fluid, invisible, but everywhere. In Christianity, it is the Holy Spirit, sacred breath, timeless and near. Every wisdom tradition agrees. You are not the voice in your head. You are the space it echoes in. You are not the thought. You are the field it rises from. You are not the role. You are the presence watching it play out. This is not a metaphor. It is something you can feel when the noise quiets, when you breathe and sense the silence behind the breath. That is spirit. It does not fix. It frees. It does not judge. It accepts. It does not grasp. It lets go. And in that release, something beautiful begins to unfold. Forgiveness flows without effort. Grievances soften on their own. Love stops being a transaction and becomes a truth. Spirit does not analyze. It sees. It does not force resolution. It reveals unity. It reminds you that the peace you've been chasing is what you already are when everything else is stripped away. But here's where the paradox lives. If we dwell in spirit too long, we float. We hover above our lives, detached, dissociated. We use light to escape shadow. We use transcendence to bypass pain. We call it spiritual, but really we're hiding. This is the danger of ungrounded transcendence. When we trade embodiment for escape, when we confuse clarity with avoidance. Because without the soul, the spirit becomes weightless, and without the spirit, the soul becomes lost in story. That's why the great mystics returned to earth. The Buddha sat beneath a tree, not above the world, but within it. The prophets wept, the poets descended. Because soul and spirit are meant to meet, the soul gives texture to the spirit. The spirit gives spaciousness to the soul. And when they merge, something miraculous happens. You begin to walk the world not as someone trying to rise above life, but as someone embodying its sacredness. You become both witness and participant, both storm and stillness, both myth and awareness. You stop asking how to escape. You start asking how to embody this breath, this grief, this awe, this moment. You become the axis between heaven and earth. You become the altar where light and shadow kneel together, because spirit does not ask you to abandon the world. It asks you to see it clearly, to love it deeply, to live it sacredly. This is the path of integration, and integration is the true path home. You are not just the descent into shadow. You are not just the ascent into light. You are the meeting point of both. This is the sacred marriage, not a metaphor, a reality. The soul says, let's feel everything. The spirit says, let's hold nothing. And together they reveal, you are everything, and you need nothing. This is not contradiction, it is poetry. It is the rhythm of healing. It is the wisdom that lives in your breath. The wound you once feared becomes a portal. The longing you once resisted becomes a fire. The story you tried to control becomes a myth worth telling. You begin to live symbolically and silently, with earthy tears and cosmic perspective, with deep feeling and quiet release. You do not deny your wound, but you are no longer defined by it. You do not cling to the story, but you honor it, knowing it is not the whole of you. You touch the light, and you remember the dark is holy too. The mystics have always said this. The soul lives in the divine, and the divine lives in the soul. The wound is where the light enters. The human experience is the sacred ground of awakening. You are not just here to have a spiritual experience. You are here to live as the place where soul and spirit meet. That place is already within you, waiting for you to remember. So let your soul lead you inward. Let your spirit lift you beyond. And let your life become the altar where they rise, together. Next time on Syntax of the Soul, we dive deeper into that inner alchemy, where shadow becomes light and longing becomes transformation. Until then, stay curious, stay conscious. And if this touched you, subscribe, like, and share it. Let it ripple, because someone out there is waiting for this remembering.